Lily. I'm an intern here at Act on Mass, and Scotia is our wonderful executive director. We are a nonprofit whose mission is to recenter constituent voices here in Massachusetts in the broken lawmaking process. And we do this in a number of ways by advocating for good governance policies, by acting as a watchdog service and monitoring the State House and tracking target legislation, and endorsing movement candidates, and through doing things like this, like grassroots trainings. So we're going to be covering a number of things tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about why letters to the editor are effective levers of power for organizing. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between an op-ed and a letter to the editor, and then we're going to walk through how to write a letter, and then we'll do a group exercise and talk about pitching them. So first, I'd love us to go around and just introduce ourselves with your name and pronouns, and then to share something you're excited about with spring here. So I'm Lily. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm really excited to finally be able to outdoor swim again. And I'll pass it off to Scotia.
Hi everyone, I'm Scotia, she, her, and I am very excited for leaves on the trees. I'm thinking because we have so many people, maybe we can just put this in the chat if that's okay. And also say where you're tuning in from. So I'll pop mine in the chat as well.
Okay. I'm next on the screen, Tony Rinaldi. I'm an ex-city councilor from Amesbury. And I'll put my next thrills in the in the chat.
Glad to have you, Tony.
Thanks for coming.
All right, I'm seeing excited about flowers, birds, warm weather, a bluebird nest box. Someone agrees with me on green leaves. Someone's excited to be out canvassing. Awesome. We love to see that at Act on Mass. Not wearing a jacket. Bird photography, that's cool.
Awesome. Love to see it. Love to see it.
Thank you all for being here.
Yes, thank you.
All right, take it away, Lily.
All right. So, why letters to the editor? So, the State House's most powerful people at the very top, have a lot of resources on their side in the legislative process, but we also do, even if it doesn't always look like it. So if our interests are to pass and fund progressive policies and reform the State House's procedures, their resources that we need to leverage in order to achieve our interests are the ability to write and pass laws and to allocate funding. And our resources that they want to take advantage of are the people, the media, and the ballot box, and they're interested in the praise of their constituents and reelection. So our legislators rely on our votes to stay in office. When they fail to deliver on their promises, we have to act. The assumption that we are not paying attention as constituents is part of the problem with legislative inaction. And so public pressure campaigns are ways to exercise the power we have in our relationships with our legislators. So this is just a visual we've put together to see how letters to the editor can work in a broader strategy to build constituent power. Because by working in tandem with things like reaching out to our constituents and emailing our legislators, Letters to the editor provide a really great way to broaden the audience of the issue that we're talking about and to put pressure on our legislators. So this is just a little bit about agenda setting theory. It posits that the media, among other things, obviously, can dictate what we think about by sort of curating a menu of issues for us to consider. And for a lot of people, sometimes crucial reporting on things like the State House and accountability and transparency can kind of slip through the cracks of everyday reporting. And letters to the editor make for a really great way for our voices to pierce through the news cycle and to center the issues that we care a lot about. So when we use a comprehensive set of organizing tactics to advance our goals and couple that with public pressure campaigns, our audience can broaden and it pushes the issues that we're concerned about into the broader narrative. And so this is an example of stipend reform by doing a lot of organizing and also by pushing our voice into the media. It sort of reverberates and magnifies into the media landscape more broadly. So this is another example about how legislators pay attention to what is being said about them in the media. They are interested in what is printed about them. Calling back to the visual from earlier, they want to see their name in the press and they want the praise of their constituents so they can eventually get reelected. And so this is an example where House Speaker Ron Mariano admitted that part of the reason they ended up passing rules last summer was because of public pressure campaigns to institute more transparency reforms. So, yeah. So this is just a little bit about the importance of letters to the editor in organizing for State House transparency. They do a number of really crucial things as public pressure campaigns. They give us power over the narrative. They allow us to reach new audiences that maybe haven't heard about our issue before. They really succinctly convey your message without taking up a lot of your time or resources, and also without taking up a lot of the newspaper's time. And then they're also a really great way to support local journalism. And they're an excellent mechanism for engaging with your community on the issues that you really care about. And speaking of, letters to the editor can be shared with your community more broadly. And by sending a letter to your loved one or posting it on your social media, you are broadening the audience of the issue and pushing your message. So this is just a little bit about how a letter to the editor is different from an op-ed. Op-eds tend to be a little bit longer. They're usually around 500 to 1,000 words. And they require some expertise in the field usually in order to get published. And for that reason, it can be a lot more difficult to get published and a lot more difficult to convince a newspaper that what you have to say constitutes an entire op-ed. Whereas letters to the editor are much shorter in length. They're usually around 250 words, but different newspapers have different word limits, so that's something to keep in mind. And they're written by any community member that is passionate enough about an issue to write something concise and compelling about it. And they're usually a lot more likely to be published. Okay. Are there any questions so far about anything that we've covered? No, we're good. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to pass it off to Scotia, who is going to talk us through stipend reform as an example for writing a letter to the editor.
Thanks, Lily. I think Lily put it really well. The power of letters to the editor and op-eds is to kind of drum up attention and writing about something that we think is important, and we think that, our framing of the narrative should be out there in the world. And as we've seen, time and time again, people pay attention. Lily mentioned that people like to see their name in the press. A lot of legislators have the notifications on for any time their name gets said um, in the press, and so they hear about it, even if it's a letter in your local news. So it can really move things. One of the issues that we've been organizing around, as many of you guys would know, is stipend reform. This is an issue that's really, really crucial to the concentration of power in our legislature and how we might want to reform it. So I'm just gonna, for those who might not be super familiar with this, I'm gonna do a little bit of background on this issue, and then we're gonna use some examples from stipend reform throughout the rest of the training. Do you want to do next slide, Lily? Thanks. So when a legislator enters the legislature, their starting salary is $82,000 a year, which is pretty sizable, but for the Boston area, not necessarily something that you can raise a family on. And what we actually have in our legislature is this tremendous system of additional stipends on top of pay. It starts if you make it up to vice chairman, 89,000, and all the way to the top to the Speaker and Senate President, who both make more than 2 times the rest of the members. This system now includes all 149 members of the House and Senate, and it's totally controlled by the Speaker and Senate President. They get to decide where every lawmaker falls on this ladder. And it's something that they use as a stick and a carrot. So you're incentivized to keep your mouth shut, toe the party line so that you can move up the ladder. And, at any point that you're here, the speaker or Senate president can dock you down a level for a vote that they don't like. So for folks that are, thinking of family, future, and things like that, this system really, really inhibits our rank and file lawmakers from acting on our behalf. Next slide, Lily. We know that this has worked really well for the Speaker and the Senate President. During the last legislative session, 9 out of 10 Democratic reps voted with the Speaker on 100% of votes, so every single vote taken in the 2-year session. So I always say this is like basically if you're represented by a Democrat in Massachusetts, 9 out of 10 chance that your real representative lives in Quincy and his name is Ron Mariano. And we know that this system, is allowed to perpetuate year after year because we have such uncompetitive elections. Incumbents are very successful at protecting themselves. Only 1 in 10 lawmakers faced a primary challenge in 2024. So, this loyalty pay system is really working. Here's the testimony of a former lawmaker about this. Former Rep. Denise Provost says, they used to poll members when an important bill was coming up. They would call us all personally and ask if we had concerns about the bill and if we decided how we were going to vote. But when the number of stipended members rose high enough, there was no need to poll anyone and the polling calls stopped. Basically, they already knew what the outcome of every vote was going to be because it was going to be whatever the speaker was doing. So Act on Mass and our coalition partners in the Legislative Effectiveness Accountability Project have been pursuing a question for the 2026 ballot that would fix this stipend system in a number of ways. It would dramatically reduce the number of stipends controlled by leadership. It would raise pay for rank and file committee members to reduce the gaps between those who are liked by the speaker and those that aren't. And anyone who still gets a leadership stipend would have to meet some baseline transparency standards in order to get their extra pay. So we wanted to highlight this as something that Act on Mass is working on, that, Lily or I might write a letter to the editor about, or one of you might be interested in writing a letter to the editor about as well. It's a pretty remarkable system that they've got going on where the speaker gets to dole out $5 million in extra pay to whoever he wants. Okay, back to you, Lily.
Thank you so much, Scotia. That was great. So now that we've heard about like an example of an issue that we might write a letter to the editor about, would anyone like to share what you might write your letter about? You can either share out loud or in the chat. Up to you.
Or something that you have written a letter about before?
Yeah, that too.
I guess Tony Rinaldi, I'm contemplating writing a letter about the audit process with Diane DeZaglo. She was a senator in our district. She was a rep up here, and I actually am friends with her. So, I mean, friendly with her. She always greets me. We always talk when we get together. So that's something I've been going. This whole process is wonderful because I tell people that even in a Democratic committee meeting, and I'm a vice chair, I sat there and said, your life is controlled by two people,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
which they are. It's two people. Whatever gets passed in the House and Senate, that's controlled by two people only. So you need to figure that out. And what are we going to do about it?
Yeah,
The audit will help.
that's awesome. We're huge fans of the auditor. You guys get a teaser. We haven't announced this yet, but I'm so excited about it. Our spring fundraiser is going to be karaoke with the auditor. She's such a
Oh,
good singer.
yeah.
So keep an eye out for that. That's coming early June.
Hmm.
I see Dave, then Kelly, then Jared.
I write letters with some regularity to the Daily Hampshire Gazette here in based, I guess it's in Northampton, and yeah, I was at the stand in front of Bank of America in Amherst, and this happens with some regularity. Someone said remark that they see my letters and they read them and they like them. But I think one I wrote recently might have been inspired by Act on Mass talking about, or somebody talking about gutting clean energy standards in the
Mhm.
Oh,
Commonwealth.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
got a letter published and I referred to the lobbyists as human detritus, and they still published it because it was like right after the COP meetings. And so I said, you don't have to go to, um, let's see, Brazil to find human detritus. There's plenty of human detritus right here in the, I don't know. So that was
Hmm.
Mm.
That's awesome. Kelly?
Thank you. I was also, same as Tony, thinking about the audit, because everybody likes to blame Trump for everything and no kings, no kings. And, we have a king and queens actually, because I think we have we have a trifecta. And I think that we have multiple people uh, that we need to remind them that, we don't have kings and queens. So that definitely the audit. And I did send a letter to the auditor telling her that I would help her or support her in any way that she would, I'd be happy to be boots on the ground. So I wanted her to know that. And then also I wanted to write something for Medicare for all, because another issue that everybody keeps saying, oh, the Democrats clutching their pearls about, what Trump's doing. And when in fact, we have had some form of Medicare for all on Beacon Hill for 20 plus years. So we have a solution. We just refuse to address it because the king and queens that we're talking about are beholden to their corporate donors and industry lobbyists. And so I have sent actually a letter to Governor Healy, House Speaker Mariano, and Senate President Spilka about Medicare for all and the fact that we should have no king and queens here. So I haven't been doing letters to the editors. I've just been sending them directly to these people. So, but I'm happy to, put something together for like probably that I've already written. I could already do that. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Andrew?
Yeah, I'm likewise interested in immigration and most immediately getting the PROTECT Act through the legislature, through the Senate, I guess.
Yep.
Mhm.
So
Jared?
I would like to know the most effective way to do that, like who to mention in the letter and in what way.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. We will cover that for sure. Jared?
Yeah, I'm really interested in writing about the income tax ballot question, just because so many communities have failed their override votes, including Winchester. And what does that mean for us now? That's most of our communities have had anywhere from 8 to $15 million in budget gaps, and that's going to hit home.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thanks everyone for sharing. That was a wide range of issues that are, so important and close to heart. And I hope we'll see some great letters.
Yes, for sure. All right, so now we're going to really get into the nitty-gritty of writing an effective letter to the editor. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about legislator skewed bias. It's quite common actually for most people, either because they know their legislator personally, or because, they get their emails or whatever it may be, that they feel like their legislator is the exception to the broken system, or they feel, some sort of positive inclination towards their legislator. But the reality is that even if we know them personally, or whatever the case is, healthy constituent legislator relationships require a great deal of skepticism. And the state house is broken, so the system indicts them all, and all legislators can and should be doing more. So do not be afraid to call out your individual legislator in your letter. So this is just a little bit about what we are going to get into, starting with how to frame yourself and your audience, and then ending with a call to action in the body of your letter. So first, and arguably the most important part of writing an LTE, is that you want to convey a wide us and narrow them frame. When people read this letter, we want them to think of themselves as part of the solution, and as part of a big majority group who is advocating for change. We want to show ourselves as some of the many, and that we're targeting the small population who is choosing not to act like our legislators. And their actions are coming at harm to us. So the us is a big, broad group that we are a part of, and we're fighting for good change. And the them is an identifiable, concrete group of people who are failing to enact that change. So this is an example of how that might show up in an opinion piece. So on the left, we have a really great example about how that is really specific and clear about who the us and the them is. So homelessness is one of our country's most urgent crises. So we are part of the group here that's advocating for change to policy. And the policymakers, who they name in the second half of the quote, are the people who are not doing enough to enact change, even though they could be. And then the one on the right is much more opaque in its naming of who the them is, and who the us is. So the collectively we is relatively non-specific, and it doesn't really cohere the us in a people who are pushing for change. And it just sort of vaguely says the state legislature without getting into why they are complicit in the issue. And second, we want to make sure we're keeping these short and sweet. The tight word limits on most LTEs mean that every word matters. So we do not want to get caught up in the granularities of inside baseball legislature stuff, that can sort of make your argument less clear. And you also risk turning off people who maybe don't know as much about the issue, or who are just looking for a compelling read. It might sort of take away from the thrust of your argument. So using more like zoomed out specifics, and focusing on the broader issue at hand and what can be done about it is really the most effective approach to a good LTE. And you also want to avoid using really complex jargon that people might not understand. So these are two examples I've pulled. In the one on the right, it's super clear who the we is. We are people being affected by the rise of AI, and Congress is the them who is not acting to make this change. Whereas the one on the right, while it's not necessarily bad, the argument does sort of get lost in a lot of the flowery language, like the sort of going really deep into like the intricacies of the job market, etc., sort of takes away from the main thrust of your argument. And then third, you want to showcase your personal connection. Your connection to the issue is one of the most compelling parts of your argument. You should be calling your readers into your piece by showing them why you care and therefore why they should care, and making an emotional appeal to readers often resonates more deeply, and makes them more likely to be sympathetic to your cause and also to take actionable steps toward your call to action, which we're going to cover in a few slides. So these are some examples of how to effectively showcase your personal connection. In the one on the left, I'm positioning myself as one of the many. So going back to the initial framing of a wide us and narrow them, I'm positioning myself as one of the people who is demanding an accountable and more effective state house. And I'm clearly articulating what the issue is, transparency and good government. And then in this one on the right here, this author is clearly articulating what their stake in the issue is by naming that there's someone who spent years studying who gets medical parole in Massachusetts. So they're not only like showing you their authority and expertise on the issue, they're also showing, why they care so much and why you should also care. And then 5, you don't want to linger on your opponent, particularly in the age of short attention spans and within the brevity of the LTE format. Your what and why need to be clear from the outset of your piece, from like the first few lines. And focusing a lot on your opponent sort of takes away from that. Plus, they get enough airtime. Leadership in the State House are, getting interviews up the wazoo. They have plenty of media coverage on what they want to convey. So keeping your LTE just to exactly the points you want to hit on is the most effective approach, really. And getting caught up in the sort of specifics of what your opponent is saying risks sort of turning off an average reader who's just looking for some more information. So this one on the right here is really, granular. It's getting a lot into what the opponent is saying and why they're saying it. And it almost centers the piece more around your opponent than it does around what you want to say. And the argument kind of gets lost in those granularities. Whereas this one on the left, they're clearly articulating who they are and what their argument is, while briefly mentioning the opponent without sort of giving them the mic, essentially. Okay. And then finally, you want to round off your piece with a clear call to action. Now that you've curated like a really effective story, and fleshed out your what and why, they need to know, now that they've been compelled by what you're saying, what it is exactly that they should take away from the piece. And to the extent that you can, you don't want this to be wrapped up in like really abstract ideas. The more actionable and the more concrete, the better. They need to know like exactly what it is that they can do and how they can effectively contribute to change. So here on the left, we have a call to action that is articulating exactly what the issue is. It's sort of rounding off the piece with a conclusion. And then it says, to help us restructure this corrupt anti-democratic system and increase pay for rank and file lawmakers, join us in gathering the final round of signatures to get stipend reform on the ballot this November. So not only has your reader been compelled by what you've said, but they also know exactly what it is that you want them to do, and they can take concrete steps toward that. Whereas this one on the right, while it's not untrue by any means, it's not super specific, and it act on stipend reform and contribute to the fight for transparency are sort of vague terms, and that's not as effective in what it is that we are trying to achieve our letter to the editor. Okay. And so this is just a way to visualize how we can do effective advocacy storytelling in opinion pieces. You want to start off with your motivation, which can pretty explicitly be laid out in a statement like, I'm here to support blank because, so in our case, it's a stipend reform, but obviously it would be filled in with whatever issue it is that you want to talk about. And then you sort of get into your personal stake in the issue and the what and why before you connect it back to the granularities of the issue exactly. And your piece should start off with a hook. Like we were saying, the brevity of the format makes it so that you really need to lay out your argument and hook your reader in within the first few lines. And so this is an example pulled from actually Scotia's op-ed in the Commonwealth Beacon. So this hook says, this summer, the Massachusetts legislature did something that surprised everyone. And no, we aren't talking about passing a budget on time. So you're sort of drawing the reader in by saying something compelling. Maybe it's even a little cheeky like this one is. But in general, it's something that either names or alludes to the issue that you're talking about and draws the reader in to know more information. So these are some more examples of really compelling hooks pulled from the Commonwealth Beacon. So again, like Massachusetts ranks low in spending for land conservation. That sort of makes you wonder about the issue. And then you're also wondering about the ballot initiative trying to change that. So these are definitely worth looking over and, really seeing how you can model your own hook after something like this. I'm going to pause here for questions if anyone has anything about what we've covered so far. We're good? Okay.
I'm seeing in the chat, Lily asked to repeat number 4.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so number 4 is a clear what and why. So the what is the issue at hand that you're talking about. So in our example, it's stipend reform. And the why is asking why your readers should care. So in the example of stipend reform, they should care because the current stipend loyalty pay system is what's slowing legislative effectiveness, and it's a lever of power that leadership is able to use to make the state house a lot less transparent. So this is also going to be wrapped up in your personal stake in the issue. So your why is about why other people should care and also about why you should care. And this should be clear from the outset of your argument. Like this should be what your letter to the editor is centered around. And then these are our 2 examples of what and why. The one on the left, like we said, is, it's very clear in what it's saying, and the author's intentions are clear from the get-go, whereas on the right, it's not as clear, and there's a lot of like flowery language happening that sort of obscures what's happening. Does that make sense? Is that good?
Yeah, I think the call to action is also less clear in the second one. It's like naming a lot of great things, but we don't really know exactly what point it's trying to make.
Exactly. Yeah. It's sort of burying the lead. Okay. Other questions, or are we good to move on? Okay, so now we have some time to do an exercise where we can develop a hook of our own. So when you're writing your hook, you really want to be thinking about what was my experience with this issue like, and how can I get my audience to relate to it? Why am I called to speak out publicly about this? Again, that's also going to be really effective in compelling your reader. And then what unique experiences or perspectives do I hold? So how can you make your hook sound different from maybe other hooks that would be written about this piece? Like, what do you uniquely bring to the table about this issue that would make for a really great opening of an opinion piece? And then what makes this moment the moment to take action, and what caught my attention about this issue? That's going to be a really helpful frame for how we can make a compelling opening statement.
And I guess we should say you don't have to fit all of these things in one sentence. The idea is these are a couple of different examples of the kind of structure that a hook could take. So you could start by talking about your personal experience. You could start by saying something cheeky. You could start by, sharing the statistic that caught your attention. So we're going to take a couple minutes to have folks just come up with a few short sentences that could start a letter to the editor that you might write. What do you think, Lily? 4 minutes?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. So feel free to go off camera if you want to brainstorm a little bit. I'm also going to be brainstorming on my own. So we'll check back at 7:18. All right. Should we gather back in? Does anyone want to share a hook that they came up with? I'm putting 2 of mine in the chat. I came up with 2.
Don't be shy. I'll put mine in the chat too.
I was drafting.
Oh, that's good.
These are awesome. Very powerful.
These are awesome.
I also saw the question from Kathy. That's a really great question, and we're going to have a little more time for questions at the end. So I'll make sure that we address that.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so now you've written a beautiful, compelling letter to the editor, and you need to get it in the press. So we're going to talk a little bit about getting published, how you pitch yourself and your piece, and what it looks like after you've been published and how to share your piece. So when pitching your letter to the editor, very much like when writing the letter itself, you want to be really clear and concise about exactly what it is that you're pitching, and what it is that you've written about. You want to demonstrate your expertise on the issue, as well as your attention to the subject. So you're not just anybody. You've written this with a lot of care and a lot of passion and attention to the issue, and you want that to come across in your pitch. And then another thing to hit on is the timeliness of your piece. A newspaper needs to know why it is that now is the best time for your piece to be published. So these are just a few of the very many news organizations in Massachusetts who accept letters to the editor. This is obviously not exhaustive. These are just some where we hold letters and other opinion pieces from. But I would say a majority of local news outlets do accept letters to the editor, and there will be information on their websites about like who to email to pitch your piece, and exactly what their requirements are. Because while it's usually around 250 words, it varies by newspaper. So these are some key features of your pitch. In the first part, you want to introduce yourself, and obviously say why you're emailing, with a quick, succinct line about what your piece is about. So, for instance, the importance of advancing stipend reform to the ballot this November. You're not like regurgitating the entire piece, but you're giving them like a quick look into what it's about. And then you want to go in to a little bit of what about your identity makes you a good fit for writing this piece. So like in my mock pitch, for instance, as a student of political science, and a Massachusetts native and an organizer, I understand in these ways the way that the pay system in the state house is dysfunctional. So I'm outlining my own credibility on the issue and also my own care for the issue. And then, another, quick summary about what your piece is before they actually read the thing entirely. And then next, towards the end, you want to offer to them, but also be clear about a deadline because you don't want to be left hanging by this newspaper if they don't get back to you. So for instance, like if you're emailing them with your piece at the beginning of the week, maybe your deadline would be to give them a week to decide. So by Friday at 5 p.m. And then if you don't hear from them by the deadline you've laid out, you feel free to follow up and ask them. And then once your piece has been published, you want to make sure to share it. Like we said earlier, sharing these pieces with members of your community is a great way to build, grassroots ties with people. It's a great way to inspire other people to write letters of their own, and just to broaden the audience of your issue. And then also, if you've been published, you should let us know so we can use our platform to amplify your voice. And I'm going to turn it back over to Scotia here, who I've already mentioned has written an op-ed of her own. And she's going to give us a little bit of insight into what that was like.
Hello. This was an op-ed that I had published in the Commonwealth Beacon. I co-wrote it with Progressive Mass's political director, Jonathan Cohn. What's fun is that my journey of writing letters to the editor and op-eds began just as you're experiencing tonight. I attended a Act on Mass workshop in 2020 about writing letters to the editor, and I wrote one in the Metro West Daily News in 2021. So many, I can attest that some of the tips and tricks that you learned tonight were very helpful for me in crafting my first letter and in crafting this one. So this letter came out of a discussion that Jonathan and I were having. We both felt like the way that the legislature had passed new rules and then immediately decided not to follow them was pretty remarkable and worthy of public discussion. But hadn't been getting a ton of coverage in the media. And so, our op-ed was one way to kind of shine a light on that. We pitched it to the Commonwealth Beacon. We were pretty intentional about selecting that magazine just because it's a pretty granular process-based issue and they tend to report on state level stuff. So we thought it would be appropriate. So that also can get to the question that was posed in the chat about, how do you handle it when it's a more complex issue? If there's a newsletter or newspaper that publishes those kind of letters, that could also be like a good place to go for that. So yeah, we pitched it and we gave them a deadline, and it was published within a couple of days. Then I could share it, in my own networks. We shared it as Act on Mass, and were able to, bring some more attention to the issue of rules reform. So I really recommend using some of the tips you used here. Feel free to reach out to us if you have additional questions. And we're just going to talk about a couple more action steps you can take as we wrap up. I just saw in the chat that Eileen said didn't know about the stipend issue. Yeah, once you learn about it, you can't unsee it. I mean, it's remarkable. So just going back to the slide about, the powers that our legislators hold over us and the powers that we hold over them. One of those is the ballot box. As we discussed earlier, we've been organizing around stipend reform. So, if you're interested, now that you may be a little bit more familiar with the issue, if you're interested in writing a letter or op-ed about the need to reform the loyalty pay system, the stipend system, please reach out to us. One of the ways that they've been able to get away with it for so long is that so few folks know about it. So this is a really ripe issue for putting it in your local press, for being able to publish it in Facebook groups that you're in, etc. So if you're interested in writing about stipend reform or really any issue, please reach out to us at info@actonmass.org. I'll also put that in the chat. And The campaign will also be gathering signatures from May to June in order to make it on the ballot in November. So we have to get 12,000 more signatures. So if you're interested in, upping your participation on that escalation arc, feel free to join the campaign as well, and I'll put the link for that in the chat. So thank you all for joining us today. This was wonderful. I'll pass it off to Lily to close things out.
Yes, thank you all so much for coming. I hope this was helpful. Also, the email is now in the chat, and I think Scotia is putting the link in the chat as well. If there are any final questions, we are happy to answer them about anything. But otherwise, yeah, thank you all so much for coming. And I hope you're able to craft a letter to the editor of your own.
Lily?